So the siting board's looking at all of these different alternatives as possibilities. And as lawyers, we're looking at it, one, is there a need for the lines? And since there's no testimony filed, I can't really get into a lot of details, but there's certainly discussions about whether the line is needed. But then there's also real discussions about these alternatives, and there's real discussions about how Eversource and the ISO, which is the entity that said you need a line, how they really develop these costs. Are those costs reasonable? That's a big part of any evaluation. There was discussion a couple minutes ago also about, it was actually in the video, and it had to do with choosing the routes and some of the factors that go into that. Well, is that process reasonable? Because if the costs don't make any sense and the route selection doesn't make any sense, then does the line make any sense? I don't think it does. And there's a number of cases as examples where the Supreme Judicial Court, for example, might glaze over, might not, but they might glaze over when we're faced with technical issues related to the ISO's process or other things that are really difficult to process, and in the legal world they would defer to the agency. But they've had many cases, I actually did one, they have many cases where they can evaluate whether something's reasonable or not. They can evaluate whether it makes sense to make a decision based upon the record in this case. They can evaluate whether it makes sense to pick this route on the basis of the record in this case. They can evaluate whether it makes sense to ignore all of you in different ways that may or may not get presented to the citing board in the decision in this case. Those are things that a court can sink its teeth into, even if an agency working on an accelerated schedule can't. So we're hopeful that, and I never want to predict outcomes, but I can tell you a couple things. One, we're hopeful that when all this is determined, and it's a marathon, and it's going through all the process, and we have the town fighting the MBTA as a real option legally, and we have Protect Sudbury and the town fighting in the citing board, that eventually you will win. And the reason I want to say that is, and I said this right from the get-go to Protect Sudbury. I said it in a hearing, the first hearing at EFSB. Eversource made a bad choice. It was their choice to pick this town and this right-of-way and this underground proposal, and instead of listening to the town, listening to Protect Sudbury, taking the invitation to do one of two other things. One was go under street somewhere, there's better options, or two, go away, go to National Grid's world and put a power line where there's already a power line. And because that's the reality. And the other thing that we pointed out to the citing board that I want to remind everybody about at that same meeting was, there has never, and we looked this up, and there was an information request, question and answer related to this. There has never been a case where a company has proposed a transmission line on a greenfield, never mind a sensitive greenfield, never mind a contested greenfield, never mind a greenfield that is as beautiful as this one, has proposed a transmission line on a greenfield where there is a choice of putting a transmission line in an existing right-of-way. That case does not exist. So I want you to understand that in terms of just how these things are looked at in the world, and just to reinforce that this is really a bad choice. And finally, I just want to end on something that also occurred to me when I was listening to Chris and thinking back on what an amazing year it's been in fighting this. We were at, again, the Eversource meetings with Protect Sudbury and the town, and your representatives, both the town and Protect Sudbury, really pushed. It's as hard as I've seen any citizens group, as any town push to move Eversource to go under streets. They made as detailed a presentation as I've ever seen. It was 8 to 10 routes, I don't even remember the number, but it was a zillion routes. It was logical, it was committed, it was the right thing to do. And I think we were all surprised, but not surprised that Eversource declined that invitation. And again, that gets back to their arrogance, and it gets back to their inability to make an adjustment. And we have to continue to fight this until such time as they understand that their only choice is either to put this transmission line where the town accepts it, if there is such a place, or they go away.